I grew up in a nice little suburban neighborhood. All my neighbors had nice lawns and acted pleasant. We had tons of street lights and all the houses looked inviting. It reminded me of those TV suburbs where everyone is pleasant, forgettable, and the drama is kept to a minimum. I remember across from our house stood a streetlight in the Jacksons' front yard. Mr. Jackson was a nice man who used to grow mushrooms in his basement. Not the drug kind, portobellos. He would give us some from time to time. They were delicious. I think the biggest bit of news that happened my entire childhood was that Mrs. Jackson took off one day. Mr. Jackson kind of plodded around, looking off into the distance after that. He became really soft-spoken and withdrawn. My parents invited our distraught neighbor over for dinner every Sunday after that, just to keep him company. He was pretty short and unimposing. Even as a 12-year-old, he acted kind of shy around me. He was always agreeable, but his eyes were the saddest that I had ever seen. You could tell she took a part of him with her when she left. The only other odd thing that I can remember is right after she left, that streetlight went out in front of the house. They fixed it about 5 times a month, but it wouldn't stay on. I remember thinking it was a metaphor for his life, like the universe decided to darken on him. My parents worked themselves up when he mentioned it because he had said it was just another thing that wasn't working out in his life. My parents declared war on the city. I think they were worried that he might kill himself. I thought he might too. They wrote letters and made calls for weeks, and finally, the city caved. For the next week, they showed up every day, digging it up and rewiring a new one, setting it in. They tore up the whole sidewalk. When they relaid the concrete, I snuck over and wrote my initials in it. After that, though, it never faltered. Lit up his house like the 4th of July. I think because my parents went that far out of their way, he really appreciated them. He seemed a lot happier in general on the Sunday dinners. Not any specific way, just more animated and a little more talkative. It had literally lit up his life. He was almost a different person. I guess sometimes it really is the little things. Well, sadly, Mr. Jackson passed away a month ago. I came home to my parents' house to help them with the arrangements. Mr. Jackson just had us as family, so it fell on us to sort everything out. I got here about 2 days after he had passed, and we had been arranging his estate with the charity when it happened. The streetlight blew again, after 15 years without a problem. My parents loudly proclaimed it was his ghost. I wasn't convinced, but I saw the symbolism. I called the city works department and tried to put in a repair order. They told me it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. I felt kind of guilty, but after seeing the heartbreak in my parents' eyes when they asked, I knew what I had to do. I'm not proud of it, but I snuck over in the cover of dark and I chipped at the pole with some hand tools. I didn't take enough wood off to seriously endanger anyone, but I did get in enough that it looked bad and needed replacing. I called the city again and restated it had went out, and then added that the pole looked like it was going to fall over and hit the house, and that I couldn't believe they would let such an unsafe light stand in a neighborhood with children. That did it. They told me a new one would be up within a week. I didn't tell my parents about the sabotage and they didn't ask. They just thanked me. Well, the city workers dug up the pole and had a crew breaking up the sidewalk the first day. It was loud, but it seemed like it would be a good memorial. I was going to put his initials in the concrete where mine had been. The middle of the second day, though, construction stopped suddenly. All the machine sounds vanished and replaced themselves with yelling. The cops showed up. Lots of them. It looked like sugar on an anthill. I was sure I was going to jail for sabotaging the pole. I waited, and my parents tensed up when the imposing knock came from the door. The police officer drilled my mom and dad for 2 hours about Mr. Jackson. Then it was weird. He talked into his walkie-talkie for a second, and then started about Mrs. Jackson. Mr. Jackson had told us she had moved back to Mississippi with her mother. The policeman informed us that they had just confirmed that the body of Mrs. Jackson had been found under the sidewalk. She had been there for over a decade. The police ripped apart the Jackson house after that. For a while, the things they hauled out looked pretty normal. Couches, tables, bedding. Then, they got to the basement and upturned all the mushroom beds. Hundreds of animal skeletons, some smashed, some ground to dust, some recently buried. Apparently, Mr. Jackson had been using dead animals as fertilizer for a long time. We had been eating murdered animals every Sunday when he brought over the mushrooms. They thought Mrs. Jackson had found out about the animals, and he had done her in. Then, he kept sabotaging the light to get it replaced, and hid her bones in the dirt before they laid the sidewalk. It was a nice neighborhood and well lit, so it wasn't like he could just drag her out into his trunk and no one would see. My parents had unwittingly helped him hide the body all those years ago. I really wish that was the worst part. The officer told us all of this, and on his way out, he made one last remark. Officer Dan had said, "Although we really can't be sure, after a decade and the flesh having been stripped off like that, I'm pretty sure he used her as fertilizer too. Have to hear back from forensics." Okay, I've been reading all sorts of stories on the Reality Glitches subreddit, and I finally decided to write out my experience. I posted my story there, and it was suggested that I share the experience with you folks as well. I hope to reach out to others that this may have happened to, as well as make others aware of this phenomenon. I still don't know how to explain what happened, but at least now I know what to call it since coming here. When I was 10 years old, I used to have a recurring nightmare about my death, to put it bluntly. I can't remember all the details, but in all of the dreams, I would be looking through what might have been a window frame from the outside. There was also an orange jacket or garment on the chair inside that I could see through the window. I would make a motion, as if I was going to ascend a rung, and suddenly I would fall what felt like at least 3 stories. Then, I'd be lying down, staring up at the sky, and see a wooden ladder, presumably from which I fell. The image of this ladder leaning against the house would be the last thing I'd see before waking up. These nightmares probably wouldn't have caused me so much distress if it hadn't been for how goddamn real they felt. I could smell the air, feel the sun on my back. I could even feel the incredible pain through my body as I lay on the ground. Anyways, I pretty much forgot all about these nightmares as I grew up. I stopped having them around age 11 and never had one again. I'm 33 now and my good friend just got married to his high school sweetheart. Let's call him Jerry. They live in a nice barn-style house that he built himself. I have limited carpentry skills, but despite knowing this, my friend asked me to help him with certain parts of the building process: drywall, putting in windows, shingling and whatnot. I think he just wanted to spend some quality man time with me, to be honest. It took a total of 11 months to complete the house. And like I said, I would drop by from time to time to help Jerry with the odd job. Once the house was nearing completion, Jerry had started putting in the windows. He asked me to come down one weekend to help him put some windows on the third floor. We ended up doing 3 that Sunday and called it quits around 7. Sunday morning, Jerry called me to ask a favour. There was a big storm coming in Sunday night, and he had realised that while we did put the windows in, we didn't seal one of them with caulking. He didn't like the idea of water getting inside after we'd just put the drywall up, so he asked me to seal the window up soon if I could. He had to take his wife to the hospital, so he was unable to. Plus, I only lived 20 minutes away. So, after a brief McDonald's breakfast, I headed down to the house, found the caulking gun, and then searched for a ladder. Jerry had brought 2 down to the site, 1 aluminium and 1 wood. I grabbed the wooden one as it was already on the side of the house, with the unsealed window. Once I propped it up against the house, I began to ascend. Once I was high enough, I was able to peer through the window, and when I did, I felt a jolt of electric fear go through my body. The nightmares I had as a kid came back to me in a flash. The smell, the warm sun hitting my back, it was identical to the dream. And I also recognized Jerry's orange hunting jacket that he had left on a chair on the other side of the window. Everything was exactly the same. Remembering the rest of the dream, I quickly descended the ladder and went back to my truck, feeling kind of disturbed. I stood there for a while, debating if I should try to seal the window or not. In the end, what I did was try my best to seal it from the inside. I'll admit I did a half-assed job, but hey, can you blame me? I finished up and went home, trying to forget about it all. The following weekend, Jerry asked me to come down and help him shingle the roof. When I arrived there, I noticed Jerry was limping a bit. When I asked him what happened, he said he rolled his ankle when one of the rungs on his wooden ladder broke. He was only a few steps up, so it wasn't a big deal. It was for me. I stayed calm, but mentally, I was a wreck. Not only did my dream somehow predict that ladder breaking, I half knew about it but never even warned Jerry. I felt like crap. That's about it though. Later on, I did realize that I must have had the ladder upside down when I climbed it, meaning the defective rung would be near the top. When Jerry went to use it, he must have flipped it the other way so the rung was near the bottom. I still think about this from time to time, and it never ceases to disturb me. Evelyn was excited. At 5 years of age, excitement meant fidgeting, whining, and asking the same questions over and over again. She was about to have her first haircut, and she wasn't upset at all at having to lose her long, brown locks. "Am I next, Mommy?" Evelyn pleaded while squeezing her mother's hand and pulling down her arm. Exasperated, Evelyn's mother hushed her sternly. She looked so tired. The winter was particularly long and hard that year, and they were both hungry due to food shortages, and there was no time for them to have breakfast anyway. Their train was leaving early, and it was a long trip to the barber shop. The barber shop was a large, old, two-story building that hadn't aged well. The walls were cracked, crumbling in places, and covered in a faded red hue that desperately needed another coat of paint. Outside the barber shop was very crowded, people shoving and shouting. Evelyn was a naturally anxious child, and if it weren't for the smart, well-dressed policeman and his dog patrolling the area, she would have been overwhelmed to the point of tears. Evelyn looked ahead and saw there were only 3 families ahead of them, all women and children. The children were much older than Evelyn, but she was tall for her age, so she didn't feel much out of place. Evelyn supposed their fathers were busy at work or home. She knew that such errands were the woman's jobs anyway. Evelyn missed her father. He died the year before from a freak accident at work, and every night she cried for him. While Evelyn was studying the ground, following the path of a determined ant, proudly lugging a crumb of bread to his hungry family, she heard a blood-curdling scream behind them. Trying to look through the sea of people was futile, and she asked her mother what happened. A lady fainted," Evelyn's mother stammered nervously. "It's quite alright. Look, we're next." It was true. They were at the entrance and the door swung open. "Hurry inside, baby," Mother said gently, ushering the shivering Evelyn inside, holding her hand tight. Evelyn's tummy was rumbling and it sank when she stepped into the barber shop. As her eyes adjusted to the dimly lit room, she took in her surroundings, and a fresh wave of anxiety swept over her. The formerly green-tiled floor was covered in discarded dead hair, mostly black and brown with splashes of grey. Near the back exit, covered by a long stained curtain, were 2 policemen, laughing as they led a woman by the arms through the curtain to a dark area beyond. A heavy-set old man, with a dirty white apron and hairy arms, beckoned her to come closer. He patted the seat of the barber chair lightly as a rotten-toothed grin spread across his lined face. The smell in the air was hot and metallic. A semi-bald woman shuffling past sobbing, her scalp bleeding as Evelyn tried to take a step back. Her mother held her hand tighter as she bent down to whisper in her daughter's ear. "Be strong, my baby. It has to be done. Mommy will go next, and after that, we will get numbered. Have a shower, and then they will give us some food." What exactly is the sound of silence? Some say it's deafening, like the world is rumbling around them. I've experienced this type of silence on trips to the outdoors, but I don't think it is actually silence that is producing all the encompassing drone, but that millions of tiny noises, from the rustling of tiny leaves to the scratching of tiny insects, joined together in a symphony of sound that could not previously be heard over the songs of the birds or the rushing of wind. The only place in which I have found true silence has been through purely artificial means. As for myself, I have found that my room is sufficiently quiet at about 1 o'clock at night, when I am the only one left awake and cars no longer pass by my window. If you live in a noisy neighborhood, try and find a room that is as sealed off from the world as possible, because in order to hear the sound of silence, there must be absolutely no noise in your room whatsoever. If you finally find a quiet place and want to hear the sound of silence, take a deep breath, pop your ears, hold your breath, and listen as hard as you can. At first, it'll be like trying to hear a pin drop from a mile away. But be patient, because after a while of listening to absolutely nothing, you should hear faint beeping or a ringing sound. It'll be hard to pick up at first, but when you hear it, focus on the noise and it will become clearer and louder. To me, it sounds like the mechanical dinging sound most microwaves make after they're done cooking. If you can hear the noise, then congratulations, you have just become infected. Like me, you will probably just brush off the noise as soon as you hear it to be a trick of your mind. You will likely become irritated with the sound and drown it out with music, a YouTube video, or the sound of your own breathing. It will go away for a while. You may even begin to doubt the existence of the sound you thought you heard. But eventually, you will have to go to sleep. If you're like me, everything has to be quiet in order to sleep. But just as soon as you turn off all sources of sound, you'll hear it again. It'll be faint and easily ignorable at first, but curiosity will drive you to pop your ears and listen again. No matter how hard I tried to resist, I always succumbed to my instinct to focus on the noise. Eventually, you'll get tired enough to sleep. Days may go by before you hear it again, but make no mistake, the noise will not have gotten any dimmer. Eventually, you will remember the night you heard the sound of silence and you'll listen again. But every time you listen, the noise will grow louder. If you're as weak to temptation as I am, you'll keep listening to the sound and it will slowly grow in volume. Night after night, you listen to the sound right before you go to sleep. As intrusive as it is, you can't help but listen more closely when you hear it. It may frighten you when house noises and breathing do not subdue the noise anymore. But with enough time, not even music will be able to drown out the ringing. After days of this, you will begin to hear it outside of your quiet place. You'll hear it in between car honks and commercial breaks. By this time, nights will become absolutely hell as you are forced to have your ears filled with constant beeping. Prepare to spend many sleepless nights searching for anything loud enough to counteract the noise. After many weeks, or perhaps even months, following your initial experiment, the noise that you could just faintly make out will have overpowered your senses. No sound, no matter how loud, will interrupt the buzzing sound you will now hear. Many people think that I've gone deaf, but that could not be farther from the truth. I can hear the sound of silence, and I can't stop. Now, you're probably thinking, why would anyone want to go through something like that? This guy must be a real jerk to provide people with a new means with which to torture themselves. That is not my goal, for I do not believe that I've truly lost my hearing. I may not be able to hear everyday noises, but every once in a while, through the clutter of sounds that fill my ears, I can make out voices. One time, I was distracted by work stresses. I walked out into a crosswalk and had forgotten to check if there was any traffic coming. I usually just expected any cars to stop when I would start walking across, but one car did not seem to know this as it came speeding towards me. It would have killed me had it not been for a voice which compelled me to stop walking just in time. I do not believe I've lost my hearing, but that my ears have tapped into a deeper realm of listening. The voices have told me what to do, and having seen their wisdom and foresight, I obey them without question. Their decisions, no matter how strange or sinister they would appear at first, would somehow always lead to more beneficial outcomes in the end. As for me, I am currently in prison. But don't worry, the voices have already told me about a way to get me out. Before I do so, however, they wanted me to write down instructions on how to contact them and pass it along to people such as yourselves so that you can hear them as well. They have so many plans for this world, but they need more people to listen to them. So please, if you ever find yourself in a quiet place, listen hard to the emptiness, and if you're lucky, you might just hear a tiny beeping noise coming from nowhere at all.